Welcome to the Attractions Group podcast. This is episode 112. Alongside Don Helbig, I'm Ryan Sir. Don, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Ryan. It's a great time of the year in the fall. All the different Halloween events open throughout the industry. Just a great time if you're a fan of the Halloween season to visit your favorite parks.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about a park that you can't visit anymore, actually. But before that, where can they find us, Don?
Well, listeners can find the Attractions Group podcast on their favorite podcast apps. We're talking Google, Spotify, Apple, and of course, we'd love it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's really the best place to watch the Attractions Group podcast. So, be sure to subscribe and just listen or watch on your favorite apps.
Yeah. So to kick us off today, 17 years ago to last month, there was kind of a tough announcement for a lot of people. Can you talk about that a little bit?
There was. I had joined Cedar Fair Entertainment Company earlier that summer, working at Kings Island as the public relations manager there. But Geauga Lake Amusement Park in Aurora, Ohio, it unexpectedly closed its gates for good. There was nothing to let guests know that this was coming until after the fact when it was announced. So it ended a 119-year tradition of thrills, family outings, and countless memories. It was just kind of an institution, especially in that part of Ohio.
Yeah. So it was once a bustling destination. The park's closure was a blow to a generation of fans who'd grown up going to this iconic park, 119 years, Don, and then it's gone in a day.
Yeah, I mean, it was a surprise. I remember, being told that it was going to close. I was disappointed. Geauga Lake was included in my first ever, let's say, roller coaster trip that I did. Carl Eichelman was on that trip with me, a guy named Tom Pusey, Anna he lived up near Columbus. Marlon Scott, a longtime ACE member, was also, on that trip. And it was Geauga Lake, Kennywood, and Idora Park were the places that we hit. And outside of Kings Island and La Sorteville Americana, I'd never been to any other parks, Coney Island, in Cincinnati. But this was my first, road trip to go visit other parks and start, getting those roller coaster credits and things. And I absolutely loved this park. It was so charming. It was kind of in a lot of ways, that old school traditional park like Coney Island. Kennywood was that old school traditional park. Idora was. So it was a great way for me to, make that first trip. And, you could feel the history, the tradition. I remember having, my lunch in that, looking out at the lake and the Big Dipper and some of the other rides. It was, like I said, it wasn't, it wasn't Kings Island, in terms of, being that big and everything like that. But it was this nice, charming, park, and I loved it.
Yeah. So originally known as Picnic Lake or Giles Pond, traces its roots back to 1817 when the early settler Sullivan Giles built a home near the lake. Giles soon established picnic grounds and a dance hall, capitalizing on the nearby railroad station that brought visitors in droves. So it's a familiar story for Cincinnati's Coney Island. It starts off as like, oh, let's do picnics, and then let's have a dance hall. Let's have a roller skating rink, and then you work up to roller coasters. But by 1887, the site had officially evolved into an amusement park, and 2 years later, the park's first ride, a steam-powered carousel, was installed.
Great ride to start out with, right?
I'd love to ride a steam-powered carousel. There's got to be some out there. Do you know of any?
Not off the top of my head, but as the park grew, the Big Dipper, that was the signature attraction there. That roller coaster was added in 1925. It became one of its most enduring attractions. So this was a roller coaster that I had a lot of fun on. It wasn't as big, long, fast as the Racer or the Beast, but it was still a ride that you appreciated, and just the age of it. It was just again, just something that you remembered, and as somebody that likes history and nostalgia and all that, was right up my alley. These kind of roller coasters.
Yeah, if I recall with the Big Dipper, it 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 didn't operate with the handbrake, but the handbrake was still there by the time I rode it in 2006 or so. Does that sound right?
Yeah, yeah. I want to say the handbrake was there when I wrote it in '82 because I don't think they were at that point yet where everything was computerized. They weren't. The Kings Island was just getting to that point. With the racer in '82 going that route with it. So, but yeah, I mean, it was I'd heard about the Big Dipper. I'd read about the Big Dipper in the '70s, so it was a big
Mhm.
deal for me to be able to go to Geauga Lake and ride it.
Yeah, and I think everybody has their memory. Those who did get to enjoy the Big Dipper, and then many tried to save it unsuccessfully. But we'll get to that, of course. Uh, so in 1969, Funtime Incorporated acquired Geauga Lake, further expanding its offerings. And then in 2000, what happened in 2000, Don?
Well, that's when Premier Park, having acquired Funtime Incorporated, rebranded the park as Six Flags Ohio, added 4 new roller coasters. They started drawing some thrill seekers from across the region. That was the goal. They wanted to try to compete with Cedar Point, with Kings Island. Then a year later, the park combined with the adjacent SeaWorld Ohio to form Six Flags Worlds of Adventure, creating a sprawling entertainment complex that offered both roller coasters and the marine life exhibits. But I felt that was kind of the turning point for me because it wasn't the same Geauga Lake anymore. I mean, these roller coasters they put in, great rides, but that wasn't Geauga Lake. That wasn't why people went there. And I thought it lost its identity,
Mm-hmm.
with the rebrand. And I think, for a lot of longtime park goers there, it just was not the same. And that was kind of the beginning of the end. As far as, I could tell, it just wasn't the same. Like I said, the rides were great, um, but they weren't going to compete with Cedar Point. They weren't going to compete with Kings Island. That wasn't why people went there. They went there. It was just a day to spend quality time, with family and friends, and it just lost its charm. That's how I would describe it. It just didn't have that same charm that it had, from my visits there in the 1980s and 1990s anymore.
Well, and also, and granted, like I wasn't boots on the ground for this, but my understanding is that part of it was a victim of its own success. It yeah, they brought in all this hardware. They added what 4 coasters in 2 years, that very infamously, and they also didn't have the infrastructure to support that. So
No.
while they were drawing in tens of thousands of more people per month, they didn't have enough seats in the restaurants. They didn't have enough area space in the midways and so on. So they expanded too quickly.
Yeah, and a different crowd was going there. That wasn't what they were known for over 100 some years. So it just really changed the dynamic of the park.
Yeah, and then speaking of changing the dynamic, in 2004, Cedar Fair purchased the park, reverting it back to its original Geauga Lake name and transforming SeaWorld into a water park. So I never did the water park. I did do that like 4D theater that was in the water park.
Mhm.
The thing I remember about it is it had like an obnoxiously long video, like probably 25 minutes. But it
Yeah.
was cool because I remember them shooting out fog and all this other stuff. Um,
Well,
but
that was my hope when Cedar Fair bought it, that it would kind of get back to its roots, what it was, because that's, Cedar Fair was, they're good operators. I liked how they operated Cedar Point. They added the hardware at Cedar Point over the years, but it still never lost its charm. Still to this day, with all the new hardware, it still feels, that old school, charm, the nostalgia, the history. You feel all that when you're at Cedar Point. So I was hoping that that would be what happened there, but obviously, it's not how it ended up.
I didn't have like fond memories of SeaWorld because I never went as a kid. But even going just like as a guest, the water park, we walked over there. Obviously, we did the 4D theater, but we just wanted to check it out. It felt like a SeaWorld mausoleum because there was just a bunch of buildings that clearly looked like SeaWorld that were closed, and then a
Yeah,
water park in
exactly.
the middle. Um, but the combined amusement and water park, Geauga Lake and Wildwater Kingdom, lasted for a brief time before Cedar Fair announced its permanent closure on September 21st, 2007, just days after the summer season ended. The water park remained open for several more seasons, but ultimately closed in 2016. I, for one,
That
am
was a tough
shocked that
time.
that water park lasted that long. I'm surprised it lasted 9 years.
Yeah, I was too. And I remember, when the announcement was going out, there was a lot of anger, by
Oh,
a lot of
yeah.
I mean, the whole community, up in Royal, Ohio was, they were up in arms about it. The roller coaster communities, they were unhappy about it. There was a lot of finger pointing at Cedar Fair that they purchased it just to close it down so there wouldn't be competition for Cedar Point and Kings Island. That wasn't the case. I mean, they were hoping that it could work, but they bought this before they bought the Paramount parks. You got to remember that. So at that time, that was one of the first acquisitions that they had,
Yeah.
and there was no idea at that time that they were going to get the Paramount parks, but they just really, incurred a lot of overhead, so they had to find ways to cut expenses, and the crowds weren't there anymore. I mean, they just weren't, uh, drawing as well as they needed to, and sometimes you have to make those really hard decisions. I know it was not easy,
Mhm.
for Dick Kenzel, Jack Falfus, everybody involved at Cedar Fair at the time to announce that it was closing. I mean, that was incredibly hard for them. So, some of the finger pointing in that, I was disappointed for them that they had to take that, and that Cedar Point had to take those hits in that. Um, and it, was unfortunate. But I remember, the local media, was calling me at Kings Island to get my thoughts and things on it. What it meant for Kings Island and all that. And I deferred them to the corporate office and that because that's where the statement and that was coming from. But it was one of my first things that I had to work with at Kings Island was the closure of Geauga Lake, and I knew being involved with ACE, being an ACE member, having that as part of my summer routine, making a trip to Geauga Lake, I knew how hard that was for me. Uh, you know, Part of my early years of traveling to other parks and that that trip in 1982, my first ever coach. So all those memories come back, and it was a very sad time for me.
Yeah. So to put things in perspective, in 2000, Geauga Lake received a $40 million expansion, and that's when it became Six Flags Ohio. And then 2004, the entire park was sold to Cedar Fair for 145 million. So it went
Right.
from 40 million expansion to 145 million out the door. So it's very difficult to see because Six Flags didn't really buy the park. It was more like, the merger between Fun Time and Premier Parks and so
Right.
on. But I'm willing to say that the value of the park from 2000 2004 was a fraction of what it was before. But I distinctly remember listening to
Yeah, it wasn't the same, Ryan, going there. I mean, it was like I said, the roller coasters and that they added, great. If you're a thrill
mm,
seeker, you
oh
like
yeah.
riding the ride, but it wasn't Jaga Lake anymore.
Yeah, and then but I remember listening to the conference call, like the corporate call, when they had made the announcement, or maybe it was like the next quarter or something, and Dick Kinzel was asked about it, and he said that their big mistake is that they had no idea what the draw of the animals were. They saw the animals as, um, a nuisance, an expense. So the first thing they did was get rid of them, put in the water park. People stopped showing up. So it was bad enough when SeaWorld left town. And then they
Right.
had the other animal options, for Six Flags Ohio, which I think kept the thing buoyed. But when they got rid of it and went the water park route, which made them have two water parks, by the way, they had one on one side of the lake and one on the other. The one on the dry side of the lake was vacant. Like it just was there, but not open. And then they opened Wildwater Kingdom on the other side. I also understand that they ran into some trouble. I remember reading an article that they hired exclusively a non-union construction crew to build Wildwater Kingdom. So in Aurora, Ohio, that doesn't fly very well. Lesson learned. And
No,
they
it
had
doesn't.
a ton of company picnics and stuff canceled as a result of that. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so Geauga Lake's 119-year history is rich with stories and memories, from hosting Major League Baseball games in 1888 with the Cleveland Forest cities to ushering in a new era of roller coasters in the early 2000s. The park played a significant role in Ohio's entertainment landscape. It's hard to, it never made it to 120. I think that's the real bummer. You
Yeah, but
know,
I mean, it was an important a part of people's lives in that area. For a lot of people, it was their first job.
mm,
So many childhood memories there. Riding the Big Dipper, People still talk about it to this day. It's a park that when I first launched theme parks by Don.com a little over a year ago, was one of the stories I want to tell was kind of the history of Geauga Lake, but I've not done it yet because I feel, with the way people thought about this park, what it meant to them and everything, I don't like, I want to be able to do it right, give it justice. When I do get a chance to sit down and do that, I just don't want to, just have a couple of footnotes about it. It ran this amount of time, now it's gone, kind of thing. I really want to put a lot of thought and everything into it. So at some point, I'm gonna do that. But I miss it to this day. Like I said, just so many fun memories there. I thought, just that the setting there, especially like as the sun was going down at night and that, with the lake and everything, it was just stunning, beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't visit until 2006. I did have fun, but I will tell you that I don't have the warm fuzzies that people did, because by the time I went, literally it was like a few gift shops were open, a few restaurants were open, all the rides were open.
Shadow what it
Um,
was.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And again, the water park was a SeaWorld mausoleum. But do
Yeah.
you have
In the 40s, 50s, 60s, even into the 70s, I mean, it was right there on par, with what Cedar Point was at that time. So, I mean,
sure?
it had its place.
What was your favorite ride there?
It's the Big Dipper. It had to be. I mean, I like the carousel and that. There were some other rides, later years, what is now Dominator over at, King's Dominion, that was a favorite at the end. But it was
Hmm.
always the Big Dipper. I spent more time, riding that. I would usually average anywhere from, 8 to 12 rides a day on it when I went.
Yeah. I think mine was X Flight. But nowadays, having ridden Firehawk, which X Flight became, and Dominator, I feel like I underappreciated Dominator at the time. But
Dominator was an outstanding ride, and I thought at the time when the park, closed, that was the best ride there. I was hoping, and now you knew when Firehawk got relocated to Kings Island that, something was happening with Jago. Like, you don't start moving these rides out unless you're in trouble.
yeah,
And that was the first sign for me that this park may not be around for the long haul.
yeah, I remember. I remember seeing rumors that there were going to be major ride. So they removed Firehawk in 2006, debuted at Kings Island in 2007, and then the rumors were that there were going to be major ride removals, maybe scale back the park. Nobody saw the whole park closing though. Like, no, that
No,
was not the
not at all.
rumor. Um,
I was stunned when I heard that that's what was going to happen. And we had, you have those different calls with the different, PR people and stuff, and you're talking to some people from Cedar Point. Here's when it's going to get announced. If you get any calls, let's defer it to these people and that. And that's, it kind of hit me like, wow, this is, so much history, so much tradition, and it's going to be gone in a couple of weeks.
yeah, and they didn't even get to say goodbye. I know that a lot of the ride operators and stuff um, got they had like maybe an employee ride night or something like that at the end of the season, and they got their last rides in, assuming that a lot of these rides were going to be removed, not knowing that the whole park was going to
No
close.
park, yeah, right.
But we can talk about let's talk a little bit about the fate of some of their bigger attractions. So we mentioned Dominator ended up at King's Dominion, still called Dominator, still a great ride. It really is. X Flight went to Kings Island, became Firehawk. Uh, didn't go that well. Now it's called Orion. um, what was the name of the SLC? Do you have that in the notes? It's
I don't.
well, the ultimate Superman Ultimate Escape became Possessed at Dorney Park. Let's not forget
Right.
that. Let me look on RCDB, because
Yeah.
The SLC ended up at Michigan's Adventure with the same name, and it's just slipping my mind. I'm sure the listeners are like, "My God, the answer is this."
Roadrunner Express was fun. I remember that.
Roadrunner, yes.
Villain. Villain was a good ride.
Villain was not good by the time I wrote it. to be honest
Yeah,
with
I
you.
didn't mind it. I thought that was okay.
Thunderhawk. That's what I thought it was, but it didn't seem right. So Thunderhawk, Vekoma SLC ended up at Michigan's Adventure, where it is today. Villain was demolished. Um, X Flight went to Kings Island. Double Loop, I believe, was demolished. Um, Corkscrew was demolished in '95. Big Dipper was closed on September 16, 2007, but not demolished for a few more years. Beaver Creek Mine Ride, that was a fun one.
I like that. That was enjoyable.
Yeah. Raging Wolf Bobs. I remember the last year they were there, they like derailed or something. Like nobody got hurt, but it was just kind of a funny story. But you brought up the Villain. The thing about the Villain was, from what I understand, when that thing opened back in 2000 or so, it was like the best ride ever. When we rode it, it was punishment. It was like being put in this burlap sack and just beaten half to death.
Yeah, it didn't withstand the test of time there in terms of the comfort level for guests. But when it first opened, I mean, it was a fantastic ride.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. So Big Dipper, I remember there was some debate about the future of that ride, because that one was a particular one that people seemed to want to save. A woman named Kat Jones purchased it, according to a news story, and then that never went through. When they did the auction at the park, they said that they offered it for free to Ace, and Ace denied that was true. Was there ever talk internally about saving it, or any kind of discussion around that?
There actually was. There was some talk about relocating it to Cedar Point.
Oh, really?
And those talks were serious enough that, there was, preparations for a press release on that, were there, in the event that would happen. I don't know why it didn't happen. I just know that it was something that they took a serious look at. Can we do this? Can we move it to Cedar Point? I think that would have been, great if that could have been done, uh, because that ride had so much history, tradition. Uh, I think the Geauga Lake fans would have appreciated that it was saved. But yeah, so there was that talk.
Yeah. So let's turn the mic over to the listeners. Put in the comments, did you ever get to visit Geauga Lake? If so, what are your fondest memories? And is this still a sore that's painful to you to talk about the ride or not the ride, but the park that was beloved by so many, and as quickly as it shot up, it fell down, and it fell so hard so quickly. But
Yeah, it's been several years, maybe 5-7 years ago, that I was up in that area and I just kind of drove by where it was, brought back some memories. But there was a lot of sadness there, just seeing, knowing what it once was and what it looked like at that point. There's talk, it's been purchased, by the city, the land and that, and they're going to kind of make it into a park, not an amusement park. It's going to kind of go back to its roots, what it was. It's kind of a little picnic place and that. So it's good that area will be, revitalized. That, the acres there and that, down the road, hopefully. But yeah, just brought back a lot of memories just going there. But you never like to see anything, especially with that kind of 100+ years of history and that going away. And I'm glad I have those memories. I'm glad I visited. I'm glad I made it a point to try to get there, if not every year, every other year. At least visit once, and just really appreciate what that park was. I didn't go there expecting it to be a Kings Island, a Disney World, a Busch Gardens, or anything like that. Even at Cedar Point, what it had become at that point in time, I liked it for what it was. And it's just I still think about it often. It's just one of those places that special to me because like I said earlier, it was part of the first roller coaster trip I ever went on.
Yeah, one of my first roller coaster trips too, I must add. But I'm glad I got to check it out. I don't have the fond memories and stuff that many others do, but I'm glad I got to see it for myself and experience all these rides, especially the ones that are gone now. But fantastic walk down memory lane, Don. But hey, got the pick six coming up next, so stick around.